Good evening. Welcome to our chapter after best practices. Now that you have your best practices, you're going to make some recommended improvements. You're going to take those best practices and you're going to apply them to your business with all the costs and all the benefits and all of the details. So the first thing that you need to know is that your improvement plan must have multiple options. You can have as many as you want, but you can't just offer one solution. So this is the structure of the chapter. The first thing is it has two major parts: the recommendations themselves, the different options. They must have a cost-benefit analysis, and if it's possible, you want to include a payback or LCC if it's applicable. You will have three, usually. You can have more. If there really are only two, you can have two, but you should have three. And if there are multiple members of the team, then it's three for each team, or three for each team member, rather. So you have your recommendations, and then the second part of the chapter looks at the analysis and prioritization of those recommendations using a decision matrix. So the two parts, the options, the recommendations that you're going to make based on best practices, usually three, one for each team member, or I'm sorry, three for each team member if you have a team. Include the cost-benefit analysis and the payback. You see there? And then the second part of the chapter, which isn't as long, has the analysis and your prioritization of your decisions based upon the decision matrix. Okay, and don't forget, every chapter needs an intro paragraph that gives what the purpose of the chapter is and the overview of the chapter. Don't forget citations for where you got your costs, where you got your resources, and all your traditional places for citations. And don't forget in your conclusion to tie it to future chapters. So the cost-benefit analysis, there are a lot of different things that you can consider when you're looking at the cost-benefit analysis. The positives, it's like a pro versus con. The positives are benefits and compare them to the negatives or costs. So the most obvious one are immediate savings, but there also could be some hidden savings. There could be opportunities for lowering risk. There could be PR opportunities. And of course, hopefully you are reducing your environmental impact, especially within the company, but also on externalities. So there's a number of things that you want to take a look at when you're doing the cost-benefit analysis. Now, you did this in your last class. This decision matrix worksheet is a really good way of showing the costs and the benefits. So you have your option, and then you list your advantages on the left and your disadvantages on the right, including things like the amount of time that's required, the training, more than just the dollar costs. And the benefits can be benefits to the personnel as well as benefits to the bottom line and benefits to the environment. So be sure you're looking at all those. And you have to have one of these for each option, every option. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can further analyze costs. And this doesn't work for behavioral changes usually, because they're not going to have a payback period or life cycle costs unless there's training involved. but it will be for any equipment change outs and upgrades and things of that nature. And so if you think that there's going to be a payback, take a look at how long that payback period is going to be. Here's the formula here. Like if you're doing energy, this is LED versus halogen. Comparing the energy used by each type of bulb times the hours of operation. So you have your total upgrade costs, including your purchase price and installation, if you have an electrician or somebody that needs to come in and install, divided by the expected annual savings. Those expected annual savings include the cost of energy or whatever it is that is that you are paying for. So your expected annual savings, whatever they are, is the cost times the consumption of your old equipment minus the consumption of the energy efficient equipment. So this is a good way of doing it. You also should include a break-even chart. This break-even chart has the cumulative costs of, say, for instance, energy or water or whatever over usually a number of years, because you want to show that there's going to be a lot of savings if you can. So you have the cumulative savings along one line, and then you have, the cumulative costs along one line, and then you have the cumulative costs of the upgrade, so that then you can see what the difference is between the two. I didn't include in here, but there's also ROI and that you can use in addition to payback period or life cycle costs. So ROI can be a third way of doing it, return on investment. Life cycle costing is another way that you can do it. This includes all of the costs over the entire life cycle of the product, the acquisition costs, the operations costs, the maintenance, taxes, although that's usually not something that's relevant, and the end of life costs. It cost me $25 to give my old laptop back to Best Buy. That was a shame. But sometimes the take back, it does cost. And you may recall, this is kind of what the life cycle costs look like. You have all of your costs and then how much they are in each year, and then the total cash outflows. So obviously you're not going to include the things, if this is an energy one, you're not going to include water. You probably won't include insurance unless it's relevant. So only include the items here that you need. This might be a good time if you're close to your stakeholders to involve your stakeholders, especially in the decision. First, you can ask them, what the costs are for training, what the costs are for. You should research any costs like for an electrician or anything like that, or plumber. But when you get into the cost benefit analysis, sometimes you can increase the buy-in if you can involve your stakeholders. Not required, but it is possible. You may recall, this is kind of what a generic decision matrix looks like. You have your options down along here. You have your criteria along the top, and then you rate and compare them on a scale of 1 to 5. I recommend don't use 1 to 3, don't use 1 to 10. 1 to 5 is usually the best way to go. And then you identify on a scale of 1 to 5 what each one of these, how these rate, and then you have the totals. Here are some of the potential criteria that you might consider. There are others, but a lot of times, how easy is it or how difficult? How acceptable is it to your managers or your employees? The cost, high cost or low cost, the benefits, Does it align with their strategic goals? Will it create customer delight with something like that? So those are just some of the potential criteria that you might consider. So here is an example of what your decision matrix might look like. You have your options down on the left. You have your criteria across the top. I have ease, benefit, cost, and acceptability. And then any weighting, because sometimes some criteria are more important than other criteria. So usually cost is more important. And again, you do not have to put in a weight for each one of these. You can just weight those that are important. And you can have one of them, like benefits × 2 and cost ×3 or something of that nature. So if you have option 1 has a medium benefit, you put on a scale of 3 to 5 or 1 to 5, you put a 3. If it's really easy to do, then that's a 5 because 5 is best. And so you would put 5 there and a 3 there. Now, when you come to cost is reverse coded. By that, we mean that 5 is good. So free or low cost is good. And expensive is bad. And so you would give it a 1. So if this option 1 is free, you would give it a 5. ×2 is 10. And then we'll just pick something 1, acceptability. Well, if it's 1, it probably won't succeed, but at any rate. So then you add all of those up and you have your weighted score, and you look at your weighted score and then evaluate which ones that prioritize, which ones are going to be the best ones that you will recommend to your stakeholders. And this is why it's good if you can include your stakeholders at this time. Then they can tell you, well, this one will never work for us, or we're really likely to do this. Now, you can also go to them after you've done your analysis, and trust me, if they disagree, they'll let you know. So some of the things, you may have a couple of different types. You can have more than one recommendation. You can recommend all of your options, but they sometimes fall into 2 different categories. One is the low-hanging fruit. Those are those things that are quick and easy and cheap to do. That's so, by God, you want to try to do those. Or you may have something that's the biggest bang for the buck, like making a recommendation for solar. So you can take a look at that and see what is, and kind of identify that in your description after your analysis of the priorities. You want to remember, you're going to describe what a decision matrix is. Then you're going to apply the decision matrix to your options. And then you're going to analyze and evaluate what you came up with. So option 1 is excellent because it is low-hanging fruit, whereas option 3 is still good because it has the biggest bang for the buck. And you've already shown that in your cost-benefit analysis and payback analysis, that this is going to be, or your ROI, that this is going to be the greatest return for the investment. They're going to save a lot of money over time. So those are the things that you would say in your analysis. As you're going through here, you want to make sure that your recommendations are feasible. So ask yourself or ask your stakeholder, if there's training that's required, or if there's software that's required, or if you have to decide whether to change out all of the lighting for LED, or maybe you want to take it across 3 years' time. one of the drivers for that could be the availability of funds. If you have something that's easy to do versus difficult to do, or time consuming to do, then availability of personnel to implement it could be important. Also, if there's something that you need to have monitored over a period of time so that you can verify that indeed it is having the desired savings, then you need to have the availability of personnel to monitor and measure. And then finally, you need to think about whether it's feasible to do training, how much training, because usually businesses are very busy. And so you want to make sure that the training requirement can be divided up into chunks. It can be done during changeover briefings or during lunch, or, although they might not appreciate that would tie into acceptability, or at some other time that is where you aren't going to suddenly create resentment amongst the employees, because you want them to want to do this. And you want to give them adequate training so they don't feel like you cut them loose with a new software or a new piece of equipment and they have no idea how to use it. So you have to use all of the training skills that you have started to develop. So essentially what we've talked about tonight is to take a look at the two parts of the chapter, the recommendations part with the cost-benefit analysis and the multiple options, and the cost analysis of either payback period, ROI, or LCC, if it's something that has costs, actual costs, and then comparing your 3 or more options with the decision matrix. Don't forget the parts that you put everywhere. And if you have any questions, please be sure to drop me a line. Or I will see you as we're going through the audits. Talk to you soon.